And I have to say, we want products made in America, made by American hands.
Refusing to accept deliveries of Boeing jets.
Stop taking delivery of Boeing aircraft.
New tariffs may hurt Boeing more than Airbus.
Not to order jets from Boeing, America's biggest exporter.
The U.S. company uses parts imported from Mexico and Canada.
Boeing Canada is showing off a cool new expansion at its Winnipeg facility.
This investment really is about the future.
Breaking news out of Washington. Donald Trump is raging as Canada pulls off a stunning coup in America's own backyard. In a move that blindsided U.S. industry, Canadian firms have secured Boeing's multi-billion-dollar contracts, sending shockwaves from Seattle to Wichita and triggering fears of an aerospace jobs crash across the American heartland. This dramatic turn didn't emerge from nowhere. For months, Donald Trump has promised Americans that his aggressive tariff policies would shield U.S. aerospace jobs from foreign competition. In fiery speeches from Ohio to Florida, he declared that no nation, least of all Canada, would dare undercut American workers again. Back in 2024, the White House imposed sweeping duties on imported aircraft parts, touting them as a shield for Boeing and the thousands employed in factories across Missouri, South Carolina, and Washington state. Yet those same tariffs sparked transatlantic tensions, rattled supply chains, and set the stage for today's shock announcement, an announcement that left Trump blindsided. Before we move on, hit the like button and subscribe. It's the simplest way to support the channel, and you won't want to miss what's ahead. Let's dive in. The shockwave came in the form of a single announcement, a whole announcement from Ottawa. Canadian aerospace firms, backed by government subsidies and international partnerships, have locked down a series of Boeing supply and service contracts once thought untouchable. These aren't minor deals. They include long-term agreements for fuselage assembly, avionics components, and maintenance packages worth billions. Industry insiders confirm that the winning bids came not from Seattle or St. Louis, but from Canadian facilities in Quebec and Ontario. For Boeing, the decision is a strategic pivot, an effort to escape the financial squeeze of American tariffs and diversify production across borders. But for Washington, the optics are brutal. One of America's most iconic manufacturers is now turning northward, placing critical work in Canadian hands. The ripple effects were immediate. Trump erupted on Truth Social within minutes, calling it a total betrayal of American workers and vowing retaliation. Analysts warn that this isn't simply a corporate adjustment. It's a tectonic shift. With contracts shifting abroad, the United States risks ceding its aerospace crown jewel to a neighbor it once took for granted. The consequences for the United States are staggering. At its core, this is not just a corporate reshuffle. It is a direct blow to American workers, communities, and industries that have long depended on Boeing contracts to sustain local economies. From Everett, Washington to Wichita, Kansas, the aerospace belt that once symbolized American industrial might now faces the prospect of mass layoffs, shuttered workshops, and the erosion of skills that took generations to build. And then there are songs at St. Louis, Missouri, home to Boeing's defense and space operations. While these contracts are less likely to be outsourced due to national security sensitivities, the commercial shock is already seeping into the broader ecosystem. Suppliers that once split their orders between defense and civilian projects now find themselves squeezed. A single canceled order in St. Louis reverberates across the Midwest, where subcontractors provide everything from specialized metals to cockpit electronics. One industry analyst described it as a domino effect. Once Canada grabs the lead contract, the supporting pillars of America's aerospace industry begin to wobble. But the human toll extends beyond job numbers. Entire communities that grew up around Boeing plants now face existential questions. In towns near Everett, home values are tied to Boeing paychecks. In Wichita, restaurants, schools, and hospitals depend on steady employment at the plant to keep local economies alive. Even a 10% cut in payroll ripples outward, straining social services and squeezing small businesses. Economists at Georgetown University estimate that for every aerospace job lost, as many as 3 additional local jobs in retail, healthcare, and services could disappear. Multiply that by thousands, and the outlook darkens quickly. The pain isn't confined to aerospace towns alone. The wider U.S. manufacturing sector is already feeling tremors. Aircraft assembly relies on a vast ecosystem of American suppliers, producing everything from aluminum alloys in Pennsylvania to high-tech cotton pits in Ohio. With contracts now rerouted north of the border, these suppliers are suddenly cut off from one of their biggest customers. Orders shrink, shifts are cut, and once busy factory floors go silent. Electronics is another casualty. Modern aircraft are flying computers with sophisticated navigation systems, radar, and avionics. Many of these parts were produced in American facilities stretching from California's Silicon Valley to Texas's booming tech corridors. The decision to move avionics work to Ontario threatens to sideline U.S. firms that once dominated the field. One supplier executive in Dallas lamented, "We invested millions to scale up for Boeing. Now those investments are stranded. Energy and resource industries are also exposed. Aircraft production is a massive consumer of metals, fuels, and chemicals. A slowdown in U.S. aerospace means reduced demand for aluminum smelters, steel mills, and rare earth processing plants scattered across the Rust Belt." What begins as an aerospace story quickly cascades into a broader industrial crisis, raising fears of another hollowing out of American manufacturing. Politically, the timing could not be worse. Trump staked his second term on a promise to restore American revs, especially in swing states hit hard by deindustrialization. Yet the optics are clear. While tariffs were supposed to shield American companies, they have driven one of the nation's most iconic manufacturers to look abroad for relief. In states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, where margins in national elections are razor thin, the sight of pink slips in aerospace and manufacturing could carry seismic electoral consequences. The financial markets are already responding. Boeing stock slid sharply within hours of the announcement, wiping out billions in shareholder value. Analysts warn of further declines if production disruptions spread. Pension funds in Illinois, California, and New York, heavily invested in aerospace equities, stand to lose billions, putting retirees' savings at risk. Meanwhile, Canadian aerospace firms are enjoying a surge in investor confidence, with shares of Bombardier and other contractors spiking on news of the contracts. Trump's reaction has been characteristically explosive. On Truth Social, he accused Canada of economic treason and threatened to impose retaliatory tariffs on Canadian aerospace imports. In a hastily arranged press conference, he declared that America will not sit back while our jobs are stolen. Yet behind the bluster, policy experts note that the White House has limited leverage. Retaliatory tariffs could raise costs for U.S. airlines already reeling from higher fuel prices while failing to claw back contracts already signed in Ottawa. Airlines, too, are caught in the crossfire. Carriers like Delta and American Airlines depend on Boeing aircraft to refresh their fleets. Delays or disruptions in production could force them to look abroad, perhaps even to Airbus, further eroding Boeing's dominance. This prospect alarms both industry insiders and national security officials who see American control of aerospace as vital to defense readiness. In short, the loss of Boeing contracts to Canada is not an isolated corporate decision. It is a cascading crisis with implications for workers, communities, industries, and even national security. From the bustling factory floor in Everett to the quiet machine shop in Wichita, the shock is palpable. America's aerospace empire, once thought unshakable, suddenly looks vulnerable. And as Trump fumes in Washington, ordinary Americans in factory towns across the nation are left to wonder whether the jobs that built their communities are slipping away for good. What makes this moment extraordinary is not simply that Canada has landed contracts once tied to America's industrial crown jewel, but how it did so and what it reveals about the shifting balance of economic power. For decades, aerospace was more than an industry. It was a cornerstone of America's global influence. The world bought Boeing jets not only because of engineering excellence, but because the company symbolized American reach, reliability, and strength. Now, by capturing the very contracts that secure Boeing's survival, Canada has elevated itself from a regional partner to a direct competitor in the global aerospace order. Ottawa's success is not accidental. For years, Canadian officials have carefully nurtured their domestic aerospace sector, building up clusters around Montreal and Toronto, investing heavily in research facilities, and cultivating relationships with European suppliers. Bombardier's rise in commercial aviation, though modest compared to Boeing or Airbus, laid the groundwork for a network of skilled engineers and manufacturing lines that could be scaled rapidly. When the United States imposes sweeping tariffs on imported parts, that infrastructure was suddenly in the perfect position to absorb redirected work. In effect, Washington's own trade policy created the conditions for Ottawa's ascent. But Canada's move extends far beyond economics. By seizing Boeing contracts, Ottawa has demonstrated to allies and rivals alike that American dominance in high-tech manufacturing is no longer guaranteed. Across Europe, Asian capitals, and the Middle East, the symbolism is unmistakable. One of America's most iconic industries can now be pried open piece by a neighbor with the will and capacity to compete. This is not just about a set of contracts. It is about the erosion of U.S. industrial prestige in the eyes of the world. The timing also magnifies the impact. At a moment when the United States is attempting to assert itself as the indispensable power in global trade, Washington is now seen as unable to protect even its own flagship companies from foreign competition. Canada, traditionally the quieter partner in North American economic affairs, has capitalized on Trump's protectionist agenda to showcase itself as a reliable alternative for global firms seeking stability. The optics are striking. While Washington imposes tariffs and lashes out on social media, Ottawa quietly closes deals, secures jobs, and positions itself as a rising hub of aerospace reliability. Consider the international marketplace. Airlines in Asia, the Middle East, and Europe are already recalibrating their procurement strategies. If Canadian suppliers can deliver Boeing components faster, cheaper, and with less political uncertainty than their American counterparts, those airlines will not hesitate to lean toward the Canadian end of the supply chain. Over time, this could shift the gravitational center of Boeing's production away from the United States, creating a parallel ecosystem in which Canadian factories and logistics hubs become just as critical to global aviation as the American ones once were. There is also the matter of alliances. The aerospace industry is not just about commercial airs. It overlaps with defense, security, and international diplomacy. American defense exports, from fighter jets to surveillance aircraft, are bound up with Boeing's capabilities. If Canada becomes a linchpin in that production chain, Ottawa's leverage in defense negotiations rises dramatically. Already, NATO partners are eyeing Canada as a potential bridge between European procurement policies and North American manufacturing. For Washington, that shift represents a loss of bargaining power in arenas where it once held uncontested sway. The broader economic implications ripple outward. By securing high-value aerospace contracts, Canada effectively hedges against vulnerabilities in energy exports, lumber disputes, and other sectors where U.S. tariffs have historically applied pressure. Diversification through aerospace gives Ottawa not only economic resilience, but also new political leverage. When future disputes arise, whether over pipelines, minerals, or agriculture, Canadian leaders will be negotiating from a stronger position, backed by thousands of skilled jobs in an industry once monopolized by America. For the United States, the optics abroad are bruising. Allies accustomed to American technological primacy are seeing cracks in the facade. Rivals, particularly in Beijing and Moscow, are watching closely. If Canada can carve out space in Boeing's production line, what might stop China's COMAC or Russia's United Aircraft Corporation from advancing further into markets once dominated by American firms? The loss of contracts to Canada may seem modest on paper, but strategically it signals that Boeing is no longer untouchable and that America's industrial power can be contested not only by adversaries, but by close allies. And there is another layer: global supply chains themselves. Modern aerospace production relies on a finely tuned international network spanning dozens of countries. By shifting contracts northward, Boeing inadvertently reconfigures that network. Canadian factories will now source materials, components, and expertise from different partners than their U.S. counterparts. Over time, that shift could create a new supply web centered not in Seattle or Wichita, but in Montreal, Toronto, and Ottawa. The psychological impact of such a transition is profound. When the world thinks of North American aerospace, it may no longer picture only American skylines, but Canadian ones too. The ripple effects of Canada's aerospace coup are also reshaping military and strategic calculations. Boeing's role in U.S. defense has always been intertwined with its commercial strength. From fighter jets to surveillance platforms, the company's global credibility rested on its ability to deliver at scale. Now, with Ottawa embedding itself into Boeing's production process, allies from NATO to the Indo-Pacific are recognizing that America may no longer be the sole guarantor of high-tech aerospace supply. For NATO partners, this development could be seen as an opportunity. A stronger Canadian aerospace sector provides an alternate partner within the alliance, one not as politically volatile, and one that can deliver components without the shadow of sudden tariffs or executive orders. Quietly, European defense ministers are signaling that Ottawa's newfound leverage could play a role in future joint projects. In effect, Canada is stepping into a space vacated by U.S. inconsistency, positioning itself as both ally and competitor in the same breath. Meanwhile, in Asia, the symbolism cuts even deeper. Nations like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, long-standing buyers of Boeing aircraft, are weighing the prospect of a production line increasingly tied to Canadian factories. For governments balancing their alliances between Washington and Beijing, a Canadian aerospace hub offers a third option: access to U.S.-grade technology without the political turbulence that comes with relying directly on Washington. In Tokyo and Seoul, analysts have begun framing Canada's rise as a stabilizing factor, one that softens the binary choice between America and China. And China itself is watching with interest. Beijing has poured billions into its domestic aerospace firm, KO, hoping to erode Boeing and Airbus dominance. Canada's move doesn't directly empower Chinese manufacturers, but it does fragment the U.S. industrial monopoly. Every contract that leaves Wichita or Everett for Montreal is one more crack in Boeing's armor, one more signal to global buyers that the American aerospace juggernaut is not invulnerable. For Beijing, that is a strategic victory in itself. The United States weakened not by China, but by its own neighbor. This broader geopolitical recalibration also reshapes trade dynamics. Canada has long lived in the shadow of its southern neighbor. Its exports tethered to pipelines, lumber mills, and resource flows dependent on American markets. But aerospace is different. High value, high skill, and globally demanded, it allows Canada to step out of the role of raw material supplier and into the role of advanced manufacturer. By embedding itself into Boeing's contracts, Ottawa positions its economy in the same league as Germany's precision engineering or Japan's electronics industries. That shift changes how the world perceives Canada and how Canada perceives itself. For the United States, the reputational damage is as consequential as the economic loss. Washington has always wielded industrial power as an extension of its diplomacy. When American presidents traveled abroad, they arrived not just with Air Force One, but with the unspoken message that America built the world's most advanced machines. Today, that image is faltering. If Boeing must increasingly depend on Canadian facilities to deliver its promises, then the idea of U.S. self-sufficiency in strategic industries becomes harder to defend. Allies notice, rivals exploit, and neutral states quietly recalibrate their assumptions about where industrial leadership truly lies. Financial markets are already adjusting to this reality. Investment banks in London and Frankfurt are advising clients to diversify portfolios toward Canadian aerospace equities, betting that Ottawa will continue winning contracts as Washington doubles down on tariffs. Pension funds in Asia are also moving in the same direction, interpreting Canada's rise as a hedge against American political volatility. These capital flows matter. The more international money flows into Canadian aerospace, the harder it will be for the U.S. to claw back its dominance. Looking at the global picture, the loss of Boeing contracts to Canada is less about a neighbor stealing jobs and more about a reordering of industrial geography. The North American map is being redrawn. Where once all roads led to Seattle, Wichita, or Charleston, new paths now point toward Montreal, Toronto, and Quebec City. Supply chains will follow those paths. Investors will follow those supply chains. And in time, political power will follow the money. For Americans, the sting is immediate. For the world, the meaning is long-term. Canada has proven that even allies can rewrite the balance of power when opportunities arise. By capturing Boeing contracts, Ottawa has not only secured thousands of jobs for its citizens, but also announced to the world that North America's industrial future may no longer be dictated solely from Washington. It is a warning sign, a wake-up call, and a turning point in the global economic order. The question now is not whether America has been jolted by Canada's move. It has. But where this story goes from here, the loss of Boeing contracts is not an isolated event. It is the opening chapter in what could become a broader struggle for dominance in aerospace manufacturing and the very idea of North American leadership. In Washington, the immediate pressure is on the White House. Donald Trump has already promised sweeping retaliation, hinting at tariffs not only on Canadian aerospace, but potentially on aluminum, steel, and other sectors tied to aviation. Yet such measures risk backfiring. U.S. airlines, already stretched by rising costs, cannot afford higher prices for critical parts. Consumers, too, will feel the pinch if ticket prices rise in response to costlier fleets. Retaliation may satisfy political audiences in the short term, but it risks accelerating the very exodus of contracts Washington seeks to reverse. Congress faces its own dilemma. Lawmakers from Washington State, Kansas, and South Carolina are already preparing hearings to probe how Boeing could allow such contracts to slip northward. But hearings and statements cannot replace the jobs already leaving. The longer Boeing depends on Canada to stabilize its production, the more difficult it becomes for the U.S. government to claim control of the aerospace narrative. For Boeing, the stakes are existential. The company now straddles two paths: cling to its American roots and risk ongoing political turmoil, or embrace a more international identity with Canada as a central partner. Either choice carries costs. Too much reliance on U.S. facilities invites continued tariff and supply disruptions. Too much reliance on Canada risks alienating Washington and jeopardizing lucrative defense contracts. Navigating this balance will define Boeing's future in ways that go far beyond quarterly earnings reports. Canada, meanwhile, stands at the threshold of a new era. By securing these contracts, Ottawa has shown that it can compete in industries once considered out of reach. But success carries responsibilities. Scaling up production, maintaining quality, and meeting global demand will require massive investments in infrastructure, workforce training, and supply chain resilience. If Canada delivers, it will solidify its position as a permanent player in global aerospace. If it falters, the opportunity could slip away as quickly as it appeared. Globally, the picture is even more complex. Airbus is watching closely, sensing an opening to peel away customers from Boeing in Europe, Africa, and Asia. China's COMAC, though years behind technologically, gains confidence each time Boeing stumbles. Russia, too, though weakened economically, sees propaganda value in any sign that U.S. industry is losing ground. In this environment, the next 5 years could mark a decisive turning point in whether America remains the undisputed leader in aerospace or whether it must share that mantle with rivals and allies alike. The economic ripple effects are also far from over. Commodity markets tied to aerospace, aluminum, titanium, rare earth elements will see volatility as production shifts across the borders. U.S. states dependent on mining and smelting could experience sudden contractions if Canadian factories source materials closer to home. Energy demand will shift, logistics routes will adapt, and financial markets will continue to price in uncertainty. Every new contract signed in Montreal or Toronto will be another signal that capital should flow northward, not south. And at the heart of it all, the American worker remains in limbo. Communities from Everett to Wichita are left wondering whether the next generation will inherit the jobs that built their cities, or whether those jobs will be forever out of reach. For them, the future outlook is not abstract geopolitics. It is a mortgage payment, a tuition bill, a retirement plan, all tied to whether Washington can find a way to bring contracts back home. The stakes, then, are unmistakable. Canada's capture of Boeing contracts is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a struggle that will test America's ability to defend its industrial core in an era of shifting alliances and rising competition. What happens next will not only decide the future of Boeing, it will help determine whether the United States retains its place as the world's industrial superpower, or whether that title begins to migrate, one contract at a time, across the northern border. The story of Canada's aerospace breakthrough is more than a headline. It's a warning. One of America's most iconic industries is now being reshaped. Not in Washington, not in Seattle, but across the border in Ottawa and Montreal. As Trump fumes and factories brace for layoffs, the question is no longer whether this shift matters, but how far it will go. Because every contract Canada secures, every factory line it opens, pulls another thread from the fabric of America's industrial might. Whether this unraveling stops here or continues into a broader realignment of global aerospace will be decided in the months ahead. If you found this breakdown valuable, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next update. The global economy is changing fast and the next shock may already be in motion.